Hi everybody! Today we are talking about gastrostomy tubes or G-tubes and tube feedings. We're going to be talking about these topics in general. If you are actually getting a student who has a G-tube with a tube feeding, your nurse will provide you with written information. They'll give you doctor's orders that tell about the exact amount of the formula. They'll do a live demonstration and they will practice with you until you feel comfortable giving that tube feeding independently. So today we're going to talk about general information about tube feedings, and I will be doing a demonstration. So let's start out. What is a G-tube? If you've never seen one before, this is a picture. So this is an infant's abdomen, and this is the G-tube. It sits flush against the skin. Some people also call this a button or a Mickey button, but that's what it looks like. So what happens inside? So this is what the whole G-tube looks like. So this part is what you see sitting above the skin, and this is below the skin. So under the skin is an actual tube and then a balloon that gets inflated, and that's what holds it in place. Let me show you another picture. So this is kind of a cutaway. So we've got the esophagus, that tube that connects your stomach and your mouth. And so this is your stomach. This is the skin and muscle. So what the surgeon does is they create an opening going through the skin and muscle and into the stomach. Then they insert the tube and then blow up the balloon. So this G-tube is not like anchored in place with stitches or something like that. It's held in place by that balloon that is blown up. So that's what the G-tube is. Okay, so why might one of our students need to have a G-tube? Well, there's a few common reasons. One of them is that the student doesn't actually eat enough food. So some of our students were preemies when they were born. They were in the NICU for a while. They were on ventilators and had breathing tubes in their mouth, and that's not a really good sensation. So sometimes they develop oral aversion. They're used to having negative sensations in their mouth, and so they don't want to put stuff in there. So they might not like certain textures or very much in their mouth at all. So that might be a reason why they're not getting enough to eat. Then there are muscles all over the place that allow us to chew food and to swallow. And if a student has a muscle issue, like maybe muscular dystrophy or something like that, the muscles in their body are weak, but the muscles that allow them to chew and eat might also be weakened. So muscle strength might be an issue. Then it might not have anything to do with the mouth. It might have something to do with that esophagus that goes from your mouth to your stomach. So that esophagus, maybe it doesn't flow very well. Food doesn't flow very well. Maybe there's a narrowing. Maybe when the student swallows, some food or liquid comes back up and it actually goes down their lungs, called aspiration. So it might be an esophagus issue. So those are some of the reasons why you might have a student who has a G-tube. All right, now, what are we going to do with the G-tube in school? So there might be a few things. First of all, you might just need to be looking at it if you're doing things like changing the student's diaper. Okay, so you might just need to look at the site. You might need to respond to a situation where that tube maybe comes out. So like I said, the tube is held in place by this balloon. Okay, now parents routinely change this balloon every so often, the whole thing. They take it out and put a new one back in. But every once in a while, this balloon might pop. So then it would deflate and it could just slide out. Also, in rare cases, I have actually seen a student pull out their G-tube. Not a fun thing, and it really hurts. But we need to be able to respond to that. Now, basically what you're going to do, it isn't a life-threatening emergency, but it's urgent. So the first thing you're going to want to do is cover that hole with something clean. We don't want to get anything dirty in that hole, and we don't want stomach contents coming out, right? So a couple things you can do. You can put a clean gauze on there. You can put a Band-Aid on there. You can put a clean tissue. You just want to cover that site. and you want to save that G-tube. We might need to use it. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So once you've calmed the child and covered the site, the first thing you're going to do is call the parent. See if they can come right away to reinsert the G-tube. Okay, so they're going to be the first person to call. Hopefully they're not too far away and they can come right away. Let's say you can't get them or there's no way that they can come right away. So then you're going to contact the nurse for that student. The nurse can come and at least put that old tube, they can clean it and temporarily put it back in to at least hold that hole open. The problem is, and if you don't get a tube in there in about maybe 20 minutes or so, that hole starts closing up. Yeah, lovely. And if it goes on for too long, instead of being able to pop a tube back in, the surgeon might need to go in and actually surgically open the hole again, and we'd hate to have that happen to our student. So if you can't reach a parent or a nurse within about 20 minutes, you're going to have to call EMS and have them come and reinsert the tube. Hopefully that will never happen to you. So those are the steps. Cover, contact the parent. If not the parent, contact the nurse. If you can't get a hold of any parent or nurse, then it's EMS. All right. So that's if the tube comes out. Let's say we are looking at the tube, right? So let's say this is a student that isn't potty trained and you need to change their diaper. Or you're giving tube feedings and so you're looking at the tube. The skin around the tube should just be nice, healthy skin. Around the tube, right where it goes in, you might see a little bit of pink skin. And there might be just a little bit of crusting, just some clear crusting. But that's about it. It should look pretty healthy. These are some pictures of not healthy GT sites. So this one is all puffed up, had some pussy material. It's bright red. You can just see that must be so sore. This one actually has tissue popping out. You can see it's all wet there, and you can see it's been draining for a while. So if you ever look at the G-tube site, and if it's bright red or there's pussy drainage, all you need to do is call the nurse. The nurse, he or she, will come and take a look at the tube, see what's going on, see if it's normal, do we need to call the parent, can it actually assess the student. All you need to be looking for is, does this site look different? Is there something that doesn't look quite right? And then all you need to do is call the nurse. Okay, so we've talked about looking at the site and what to do if that tube comes out. So now we can talk about feeding our student. Okay, so what the heck goes in through this tube? What can we feed our student? So you might see a few different things. So these first two, a can and kind of like a juice box cardboard kind of thing, these contained formula. And formula typically looks like baby formula. It's kind of like thick milk, I guess, and has a little bit of an odor to it. So you might get a can or a container. Some folks, especially older children, might not be on formula, they might be on pureed food. So they take actual like vegetables and grind them all up and put them in a package, and that would go into the student. So it's kind of like baby food, essentially. So you might have a container like one of these, or you might have a pouch, depending on what you're giving the student. Okay, so that's what we would put in. How do we get it in there? Again, there's a few different ways. So by pump, by gravity, and by bolus. Those are the three ways. So let's talk about them a little bit. So this is an electronic pump. If a student can't get a large amount of feeding into their stomach at one time, maybe it makes them nauseous or throw up, the formula might go through this pump. A tube comes in, there's a little motor inside, and the pump squirts just small amounts of formula into the tubing. So the student only gets a little bit of formula gradually. They might come with a backpack where you have the pump, the formula, and some tubing. And then the student wears the backpack. So everything here is in their backpack, and then the tubing attaches to their stomach, to that button. Now, if you have a student who is getting a tube feeding on the pump, don't panic. The pumps are pretty easy to operate, and the nurse will review it with you multiple times so you really have it down well before you are doing it on your own. So you'll get a lot of instruction about that. The two more common ways are gravity and bolus. What gravity is, here's that little G-tube button. Here's a syringe and tubing. We put formula in here, open a clamp, and just let it flow by gravity into our student. So this is a gravity tube feeding. It just flows on its own. This is more of a bolus tube feeding, where we take a syringe that still has the plunger and we actually push the plunger and push the formula through into the student's stomach. So these are two possible ways that you could be administering some formula, or the pureed food can be given this way. All right, so now we're going to talk about the equipment and how it works with the syringes and the tubings, and then I'm actually going to demonstrate a gravity feeding for you. Okay? All right. So before you gather your equipment, you always want to really wash your hands really well. So let's look at some of the equipment. So first of all, I said that you have a syringe. And most syringes have 60 or 50 milliliters or cc's. So that's the volumes are kind of measured on there. So if you were doing that bolus feeding where you push in, you would still have this plunger. Since we're doing gravity feeding, we take out the plunger and we just have this syringe, okay? Now, there are a couple different types of tubes that go from the syringe to the button. So this one is kind of a thicker one. So here, the big end is where the syringe gets attached, and this little end is actually where that goes into the button. There's a clamp on here that can be opened or closed. So you can see right now the clamp is closed and the tube is pinched off. To open it, we just lift up that top piece. And so now tubing is open and stuff can flow through it. To close it, we just push it underneath there, and now it's clamped again. So this is a thicker tubing. And then this one is a thinner tubing. This one goes right into the G button that way, straight on. This one goes in from the side. It's a little bit smaller, but again, it still has this tube. Now this tube, you can see it has two openings, right? The big one on the top and the small one on the side. You want to make sure that the one on the side is closed because we're only using the big one, okay? So you're only using the big hole. Now, this is going to attach to the student. This is going to attach to the syringe. If I were to just attach this syringe, put formula in it, and open my clamp, the formula would flow down, but all the air that's in this tubing would also go right into the student's belly. Some students can tolerate that, but some get a real bellyache. So I'm going to show you how we first fill up this tubing and then attach it to the patient or the student. It's called priming. Now, before we start working with any of the formula or what's happening with the student's belly, we want to put on gloves, okay? Because if you think about it, we're putting stuff into the belly. Stuff can also come out of the belly. If our student is hooked up to a tube feeding and they really start laughing hard or they have a huge sneeze, stuff can come back out of the tube. You want to have your gloves on, okay? All right, so we've got our tubing and our syringes at the top. The little side is pushed shut. My tube is clamped. So I'm going to take a cup and set it next to me, and I'm going to put this end into the cup. So that's what's happening down here. My clamp is shut. I'm going to pour, I would probably have my container, right? But I'm going to pour a bit of formula into here. Don't fill it up all the way. Just fill it up a bit. And right now, this tubing just has a few bubbles in it. It's empty. When I open the clamp, get this on my right hand. When I open the clamp, the formula is going to flow through. See it flow through and dripping out the bottom. And then I close it. All I want to do is get formula all the way through till the bottom. So now, when the feeding flows through, the student doesn't get a whole bunch of air in their belly. All right, so let's look at actually connecting this thing. So I've got my infant here, my little guy. This is Jack. And Jack has a G-tube. This part on the side here, you don't ever need to worry about. The nurse or the doctor uses this to inflate and deflate that balloon. So don't ever worry about the side. So we are just going to undo this. We're going to turn it that way. Now, if you look on this, has a black line, and then it says lock and has an arrow. That black line is going to hook up, going to line up with the black line on here. So I'm going to push the end right in, and I'm lined up there. Now I'm going to go the direction that says to lock, turn that around. So now, if I pull on it, it doesn't come out. It is locked in place. So we are good to go. Okay? So again, we lined up the black lines and then turned it in the direction that says to lock, because we want it locked in place. Then, this is gravity feeding. So if I held this really high up, it's going to go in fast. If I hold it down low, it's going to go in slow. Okay? So I want my tube feeding to go in steadily, but not whoosh all at once. So when I'm actually doing a feeding, I would unclamp this and let my formula go down. When it gets towards the bottom, I would clamp it again and add more formula from my can. Okay? And so I'm just going to keep adding formula and letting it flow down by gravity until I have all the amount that your nurse told you to put in. It might be a whole can, it might be a half a can, it might be a certain amount of these cc's or milliliters. But once I'm done, so I've given all the amount of formula that I need, and I'm down to my last little bit of formula. I'm going to clamp my tube off again. Now I want my student to get all the formula that's still left in this tube, and I want to rinse everything out. So now your nurse is going to tell you that you are going to put in a certain amount of water. Now when you're putting in that water, that the nurse is going to tell you maybe it's 60, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 120. So maybe you'll need to fill up the syringe twice. But you're going to still keep the tube clamped. You're going to pour in however much water the nurse tells you. Then you're going to unclamp your tube and let the water flow in. The water is going to flow much faster because it's not as thick. Okay, so this is called the flush. So the nurse will tell you the amount of formula you need to give and the amount of water flush that you need to give. So let's say we're all finished. Let me empty out Jack's tube here. Now we're all finished. Now we're just going to go in reverse. We're going to make sure our tube is clamped. And now I'm going to spin Jack's tube around until my black lines line up again. Okay? And then I can just pull it out. So not a problem. So I just did the opposite. I lined up my black lines, went back the opposite direction of the arrow, pulled it out, And now I'm just going to close this little button, and he's going to be good to go. Okay? So not too complicated. Remember, your nurse is going to practice with you in person to make sure that you have all the information you need. He or she is also going to share with you some forms, because you're going to write down the date and time of your feeding, how much formula, how much water you gave, and if there were any problems. All right? So there's going to be a little bit of charting. Let's just talk about 2 common issues that you might come up against. Let's say we have our feeding set up and we unclamp our clamp and the formula won't flow. Sometimes if we slide this clamp just a little bit up or a little bit down on the tubing, it might just get rid of the place where it's clamped. The other thing that you might do is you might just squeeze the tubing a little bit, and that might help it flow. If you've tried those 2 things though, don't try to push this in with a plunger or anything like that. There's obviously something going on that's blocking that formula from getting through. You want to call the nurse. He or she can come, look at all the equipment, do some maneuvering, and figure out what's going on, okay? So remember, you can always call your nurse for any problems that you have. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to share with you today. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and now you know a little bit more in-depth information about G-tubes and tube feedings. Thanks a lot, everybody.